Hello class. In Chapter 9, your textbook covered the methods used by law enforcement officers, including undercover work, that often give rise to ethical issues. The central question posed in Chapter 9 was, what means and methods are acceptable to catch criminals? The answer to this question is often dependent on whether one subscribes to a crime control model or a public servant model of law enforcement. Both were discussed in Chapter 7, and whether one's ethical decision-making process is guided by either utilitarianism or ethical formalism, discussed in Chapter 2. Now, to refresh your memory, Glockers, a criminal justice researcher, presented us with the question of whether one could still be a good person if bad means were used to arrive at a good end. The example he used was in the Dirty Harry problem, where Glockers asked whether it was ethically acceptable for police officers to inflict pain on a suspect in order to acquire information that could save an innocent victim's life. This question was used in Chapter 9 to explore the discussion of what has been called noble cause corruption. The debate about noble cause corruption is that officers may sometimes, and even frequently, employ unethical, perhaps even illegal means to catch criminals because they believe it is the right thing to do. As we have learned, noble cause corruption is an example of utilitarian ethical viewpoints. That is, the ends always justify the means. Some criminal justice researchers argue, for instance, that practices such as test-lying or lying to get a warrant or conviction and coercion are not caused by personal selfishness, that is, personal gain, but rather that it is an ends-oriented cultural belief system that exists in many police agencies. As it turns out, in most cases, officers who will do what it takes to get an offender off the street, even if they have to use a magic pencil to make up facts that do not exist, consider themselves ethical and noble because of the desire to help make the community safer. Now, officers who behave in this manner do so despite their professional responsibility to the law enforcement code of ethics and canons of conduct. Let me recite for you now the code of ethics that every police officer swears to uphold. As a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. I will keep my private life unsullied as an example of all, maintain courageous calm in the face of danger, scorn, or ridicule, develop self-restraint, and be consistently mindful of the welfare of others. Honest in thought and deed in both my personal and official life, I will be exemplary in obeying the laws of the land and the regulations of my department. Whatever I see or hear of a confidential nature, or that is confided to me in the official capacity, will be kept ever secret unless revealing it is necessary in the performance of my duties. I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudices, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. With no compromise for crime and with relentless prosecution of criminals, I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately without fear of favor or malice or ill will, never employing unnecessary force or violence, and never accepting gratuities. I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of police service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God to my chosen profession, law enforcement. What I want you to recognize from the proceeding is the ethical dilemma created when an officer must choose between conflicting value systems. On one hand, an officer has a sworn duty to always behave according to the code of ethics, while on the other hand, rationalizing their possible corrupt behavior as noble and necessary to prevent crime and perhaps save lives. The bottom line and takeaway from this chapter is to recognize the fine balance between ethical formalism, doing one's duty, and ethical utilitarianism, doing for the good of the many. Coming up next week in the following chapter, you will become familiar with the sources of legal ethics, the concept of an attorney as a moral agent, the variety of ethical issues faced by defense attorneys, and the variety of ethical issues faced by prosecutors. Thanks for listening, and now please continue with Week 12 assignments.